Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here today. You guys are all in the trauma-informed care in higher education centering BIPOC, Womxn, and mothers. I'm sorry. And so if you guys could all, mute your microphones if you don't already. We have two guest speakers today who are going to be discussing some very important issues. We have Anna, is it Pano?
Pano.
Anna Pano, I'm sorry. And we have Katina Myers.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to introduce Anna first. Anna is a social worker, educator, and community organizer with more than 8 years of direct experience and training in trauma, work, child welfare, and substance misuse with system-impacted, formerly incarcerated, and immigrant refugee youth, families, and communities. She values self-determination and holism practices with communities. She works alongside centering traditional and community-based approaches. Anna is and I don't want to mess this up here, but it's Anna is a Zapotec Purepecha. Is that native background and formerly undocumented, which those experiences have profoundly shaped her worldview and interest in practices of wellness and decolonial social work. Okay. Katina Myers is originally from Los Angeles and moved to Fresno. She is currently attending Fresno State and working in the social work department. She's a Title IV participant and plans to work in CPS for years to come. Her passion is to assist current foster youth transition and adulthood while assisting with barriers and eliminating many negative challenges throughout the adulthood. Okay, so without further ado, Anna Pano and Katina Myers.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm just going to share my screen. So thank you again for that introduction. So we are going to be talking about trauma-informed care in higher education, centering around formerly incarcerated people of color, women, and mothers. So again, so you did get a brief introduction regarding this, so thank you for that.
And so we'll be going over an overview of today's discussion. We'll be talking about the various types of trauma, and we'll be drawing the connections between formerly incarcerated people, trauma, and how that impacts learning. We'll also be going into barriers in higher education with specifically looking at higher education, looking at barriers in social work, specifically to higher education, then motherhood. And lastly, we'll provide some different ideas around holistic approaches that can really inform trauma-informed sensitive schools, specifically in higher education. We also want to keep in mind is that some of the different topics or conversations we might be having today can be triggering for some people. We'll be discussing very sensitive issues, and we also want to just be very supportive is that at any point, if you feel overwhelmed or you feel triggered, that we support you in logging off. And so we also want to just check in with you if how you're feeling at the moment, what's going on with your body, what's going on in your mind, and what do you need right now. And not just after the session, but even throughout the whole day. So if you feel like you need to stretch, you need to drink some water, like eat a fruit or anything, stretch, dance, we really support that. We want you to all feel fine after this and throughout the next 2 days.
So we did want to go ahead and do a land acknowledgement. So I'm going to go ahead and read something to you guys. So we are located on the traditional territories of the Yokuts. We acknowledge the traditional territory. It is recognized its longer history beyond colonization and the establishment of the settler state, as well as its significance for the indigenous people who lived and continue to live upon the territory, also known as California, and whose practices, knowledges, and spiritualities were and are tied to the land and continue to develop in relationship to the land and its other living and non-living.
We also have a collective message in terms of what's been going on, not just presently, but historically here in the United States. And we recognize that the end of slavery and genocide here on so-called United States was not the end of dehumanizing Indigenous and Black peoples, but it's been an intentional racist ideologies that's been so ingrained in the American legal systems, police systems, child welfare systems, educational systems, and it affects our ways of being, living in our existence. We want to honor youth, children, and families who've been affected, whether presently or historical, from these same systems, whether they were in harmful or in unjust ways. We're also committed to acknowledging and recognizing ancestral, familial, women, mothers, and community knowledges that are often not considered valid. And we also want to take this time, and for me personally, is that it's critical, especially for non-Black communities and non-Black people, to engage in anti-racist work, as we know that this contributes to anti-Blackness. And before we get started, we do want to go over some terms that we'll probably be hearing out throughout the session. And this just really lays out the foundation of the different messages that we'll be doing throughout this whole session. So trauma-informed care is defined as a program, organization, or a system that realizes the widespread impact of trauma and understands potential paths for recovery. It recognizes the signs and symptoms of trauma in people, families, staff, and others involved with the system, and responds by fully integrating knowledge about trauma into approaches, policies, procedures, and practices, and seeks to actively resist re-traumatization. Trauma-sensitive school, also very closely to trauma-informed care, is where faculty and administrators can recognize and respond to individuals affected by trauma and create an environment that is safe, respectful, and supportive. Trauma-informed approach has 6 key principles, which include safety, trustworthiness, peer support, collaboration, empowerment, culture, and gender. And continuing, so with trauma, defining that it's a psychological emotional response to an event or an experience that is deeply distressing or disturbing. It's really important to know that trauma is experienced differently by people, and trauma can develop throughout the years. And so as we know that trauma has become much more of a, I guess you could say, a more known word, or it's being recognized, whether like at local levels or national levels, we still feel that it lacks within higher education. And so we know that trauma-informed care, especially on campuses, can be very supportive in terms of assisting students in feeling safe, empowered, and welcomed. And we feel that one of the first steps that is critical is for faculty or administrators on campus to begin to understand the great importance of trauma that is directly with students, and when specifically talking about systems impacted or formerly incarcerated people. And so with historical trauma, it's cumulative emotional, psychological wounding over one's lifetime and from generation to generation following loss of lives, land, vital aspects of culture. And this is a definition by Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart. And some different ways of thinking of historical trauma often can be with relating to Native children who were removed from their families and from their lands and placed into boarding schools or foster care systems. Also, the separation of children and families when enslaved people from Africa were brought to the Americas. Racial trauma is also known as race-based traumatic stress, is a collective effect racism has on individuals' developmental and physical health. And different types of examples of traumatic experiences can be sexual abuse, physical abuse, intimate partner violence, war experiences, homicide, youth that have been in the foster care system, incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, whether in jails, prisons, juvenile justice systems, and detention jails. Just to go a little bit more further into trauma. Trauma is very physically and emotionally demanding, and it takes a toll on the body. And even after a traumatic event happens, people can still have stressful reactions to it, whether they are aware of it or not. And so just going into a little bit more into historical trauma, specifically when looking in the United States, some different groups that have been considered to experience historical trauma are Africans, Black African Americans, American Indian, Indigenous peoples, Latino, Latinx people, immigrant refugees, racialized communities, people of color, and families living in poverty.
So the next slide, we're going to be focusing on the impact of trauma into adulthood. So a study was conducted by Felitti in 1998 with 17,000 participants, showed that a number of traumatic childhood events increases. So does the risk for serious health problems in adulthood. In addition, adults who experience trauma as children are 15 times more likely to attempt suicide, 4 times more likely to become an alcoholic, 4 times more likely to develop a sexually transmitted disease, 3 times more likely to use antidepressant medication, and 3 times more likely to experience depression.
And just going into the ACEs a little bit, so you see the graph on the bottom right, how adverse childhood experiences can influence health throughout life. ACE stands for adverse childhood experiences, and this can include abuse, maltreatment, and exposures to different types of violences. And so any of these types of traumatic experiences can affect the physical, social, emotional, and cognitive development. And so when looking at the connection with the relationship with people who have experienced incarceration, higher education, and learning, many of people who had these experiences have not received the supportive services or approaches to healing. And so many formerly incarcerated people may have unaddressed trauma, whether it's from childhood or in adulthood. And it's really important to understand that there's also the stigma of who's a perpetrator and who's a victim or an offender. And most of the time, society tends to see people who've been incarcerated as people who cannot be trauma survivors themselves. And also when looking at gender specifically, society often does not view men who have been incarcerated and have committed acts of violence that themselves they could have experienced some type of violence incarcerated. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be specific to men, but people who've been incarcerated can have experienced some form of violence when incarcerated. And this is a study. So the previous slide had a study, and I'll read this one right here. A study from 2012 looked at 491 women in 9 rural and urban US jails and found that trauma and victimization were nearly and universal among this population. 86% of women had experienced sexual violence, 77% had experienced intimate partner violence, and 60% had experienced caregiver violence.
So some of the potential signs when focusing on trauma and post-secondary learners, some of the signs that you might see is difficulty focusing, attending, retaining, and like recalling information. They might have a tendency to miss a lot of classes. Some of the challenges they have with emotional regulations, possible fears of taking risks, anxiety about deadlines, exams, group work, or public speaking. They'll have troubles in areas focusing on anger, helplessness, or disassociation with stress, withdrawal and isolation, and involvement in unhealthy relationships. So this slide, I wanted to focus on trauma-informed care as a social work student, given my perspective. So some of the 3 key points that I wanted to focus on is lived experience, language, and being a Title IV-E participant. If you're Title IV-E, is basically a program for social workers who want to work in the field regarding foster youth and CPS. So with lived experience, students in higher educations need resources for trauma before serving a population. So I feel like this is essential because oftentimes going throughout the program, we'll learn about new resources that we can potentially provide to clients. And oftentimes I feel like the department may not have realized or may not have acknowledged that some of these resources would have been or could be beneficial for some of the students. A lot of time, like for example, you'll see some of the students wanting to be LCSWs, licensed clinical social workers, but haven't participated in therapy themselves. So I see it as kind of difficult for you, for a person to assist someone being regarding trauma and haven't necessarily addressed their own personal traumas, or if did have traumas that's related to a potential client, how could you efficiently serve a client without kind of providing resources for yourself as well. And I provided a little bit on the ACEs scores. So that is essential because as social workers, I feel like everybody should take the test and learn about their ACEs scores. So it is a test with 10 questions. And in one of them questions, they do ask about has anybody in your family been impacted by the prison system? So, and then lastly, with therapy, also we offer services inside mental health services on campus at Fresno State, but oftentimes the staff are not fully like trauma informed, and many of our classmates often do their internship in the services as well. So it is kind of difficult for you to go seek services on campus, and as interns, we're still learning, and regarding staff, they're not fully trauma informed to handle some of the situations that we may provide to them. The second one is language. I feel like this one hits home because regarding language, the terminology used to describe people that our systems impacted can often offend or re-traumatize students. So I feel like the way that we speak in higher education.
I think it froze.
With affiliated with the police department. And excuse me.
It broke. It cut off.
Oh,
Froze. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Which part on language?
I think you went past the language part. I think you're good on that one.
Okay, so just lastly, we had a speaker come and talk to some of the social work students, and I was saying, excuse my language, he referred to victims of human trafficking as hoes, and it offended a lot of the students. And yes, just being mindful of the language that we use, because sometimes we don't want to forget that some of the social workers may have come from that same population that we're going or that we're potentially going to serve. And also we don't want to teach them that terminology to use when working with clients. And lastly, I just wanted to point out, with the Title IV seminars, we do receive a lot of information, and I kind of wanted to gear it towards kind of as like a role model of how other social work and even outside, like criminology and law, other departments, the Title IV seminar provides a lot of information, and a lot of us are trauma informed and certified. And if you weren't in Title IV, I believe maybe some of the PPS students, which is the social workers who work in a school, they may have received the certification, but the rest of the social workers did not receive the training that we did. And I think it is very essential for social work students and staff to be trauma informed and certified. So this next slide is regarding the barriers to employment with system impacted women. So education on rap sheets and records throughout graduate school is essential. I feel like with internship and also after graduating the program, we have to access background checks and for the internship and employment. And throughout the process, I feel like there was a lack of guidance regarding background checks, and some of the, like Anna provided some of the symptoms, and regarding like stress and anxiety and that fear of the unknown. Some of us didn't feel like it was necessarily clear, like what happens if we do our background check? Is the background check going to clear? If it doesn't clear, what's going to happen after that? Will we be provided a different internship, or would we have to quit the program? And if our background checks did clear after employment, will we still be able to work even though we were able to do internship? So just the lack of education, like on the rap sheets and the process, I feel like if we can teach that in the social work program, that would be very essential. Next, it was some of the system impacted programs, such as the Root and Rebound and Project Rebound on campus. I feel like the social work program didn't like basically tell us about it. It was from word of mouth. I learned it actually from my undergrad, and we did have a speaker by the name of Arnold, who came and presented towards the end of the semester, which I feel like the information would have definitely been more essential towards the beginning of the semester. And a lot of my classmates did not know that Project Rebound existed on campus for people who were system impacted. And then next, the lack of experience related to professions. I feel like there is kind of a gap when, towards the end, when you're graduating from the social work program, basically in your last semester, they prepare you for mock interviews and completing resumes. But oftentimes, some of the people who are system impacted, the only experience that they have related to the profession is through internship. because again, with DOJ clearance, the Department of Justice clearance, sometimes you're not able to work in the human services field. So you're not able to provide that extra experience on your resume. So I feel like if we can kind of bridge that gap, that would be essential as well. Lastly, with system impacted related to motherhood, the two that I wanted to focus on was childcare and healthcare. So regarding childcare, again, more anxiety, also a lack of social support. So oftentimes with graduate school, you can work, you can attend morning classes, night classes. We have a variety of times where you can apply for classes or register for classes, but have like late registration. I'm not sure how they, and no one was really able to give us an answer on how they determine who gets to register at what times. But oftentimes if you get the later registration, you usually have night classes. And we do have a childcare on campus, but I believe the hours close at 5:30. So it's not really ideal for mothers who have children, when it will be beneficial if the children were on campus the same time they were on campus, but then it's a conflicting of hours. Also, the affordability, if you're not able to get into childcare, and if you're not able to get into childcare on campus, then trying to be able to afford some of them services, and especially if you're working like an entry level or a minimum wage job. And then oftentimes if you're not in childcare with your school, some of the childcare hours and holidays do not align, which again, like I said, more anxiety, more stress, fear of failing classes.
I believe Katina froze once again.
Yeah, she did.
Okay. She's been having some technical difficulties there. Okay, I think she's back. Let's see.
Katina?
She's still frozen.
Oh, I completely logged off.
My apologies, am I back? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
So just, I can go ahead and read off my notes. Pretty much mothers not working. Oops. So mothers not working from home and having school closes, close creates the barriers, or if mothers can work, if they will possibly face eviction and lack of employment. Oftentimes with the virtual learning, the teachers may rely on some of the parents to assist, because especially if you have younger students, or if you just have children who are not like necessarily tech savvy, it'll be kind of difficult for the mom to assume the teacher role while still trying to work virtually, or as well as participating in her own classes. So just that extra assistance with the childcare will be beneficial. And then with healthcare, like how we previously mentioned with the mental health services, train staff on campus to be trauma informed regarding unique needs of system impacted. So we provided two examples. One would be the sterilization of women without consent in the prison systems. So that is a thing that was is currently going around, and in the past it was no, so it's basically been going on for a while. And what happened what this will look like is if a woman who was released from prison decided she wanted to obtain higher education, decided to go into the mental health services because there is therapy sessions on campus, and basically try to confide in therapy or participate in therapy sessions. Just making sure that the trauma staff, the staff are trauma informed will really help her to feel better about herself and really get the maximum benefits from therapy. Another example will be victims of rape. I think that'll be essential as well, because that is another form of trauma. And if we're going to receive these type of services, if we can be trauma informed and not traumatized by potentially asking the wrong question or saying the wrong thing, is definitely ideal.
I also want to add that there's also several unaccounts of different types of sexual assaults that take place, specifically for people who are incarcerated. And so when I say that, it's also understanding that specifically men or women or different genders could be experiencing this while incarcerated. And being able to, exactly how Katina's saying this, is that we need to have trained staff that understands the multiple ways that that can look like, especially when we have a student coming in looking for services.
So some of the holistic approaches in higher education that we wanted to focus on. So one would be provide in-depth seminars for system impacted and social work students regarding incarceration. So providing understanding and experiences of system impacted, including resources on campus and in community. This basically refers to how pretty much nobody really knew that Project Rebound was available for people who were system impacted on campus. So we can have that information on campus. That will be really good. Another one will be like the virtual learning. So with the flexibility and excused absences, just really being sensitive to a caregiver's need. Again, when the pandemic occurred, people were putting on multiple hats while everyone was doing remote learning. And oftentimes, even a break, or if we did decide to go back in person, sometimes it's conflicting in schedule, and sometimes we need more than excused absences. But yeah, just overall really being sensitive to a caregiver's needs will be ideal.
In one of our slides, we also want to talk about a little bit of just the different ways that you can observe the different forms of trauma, whether it's physical or internal. And some of the different areas that we have is anxiety and fear, re-experiencing of the trauma. So people can re-experience the traumatic event, whether that's having flashbacks or vivid images. Also feeling vigilant. So for example, feeling very like on the edge, nervous, and also having like avoidance, so PTSD symptoms. And lastly, like self-image. So almost having maybe negative views on the world, leading more towards depression, sadness, or feeling lonely. And so recognizing trauma in learners and promoting resilience, we have a quote right here, and it says, "A trauma-sensitive school is one in which all students feel safe, welcomed, and supported, and where addressing trauma's impact on learning on school-wide basis is at the center of its educational mission. An ongoing process allows for the necessary teamwork, coordination, creativity, and sharing of responsibility that centers students." And in one of our last slides, we have holistic practices that can be practiced at the college or university level, and specifically more with administration, and student services. So we definitely see the importance of trauma-informed development among educators and administrators. We almost see that as like educators being almost the frontline workers here at the college. And so we think it's really important to have it's also having an awareness, but an understanding and being able to recognize symptoms, and also being able to understand when there's different types of, whether it's going back to physical or internal feelings that a student may be showing, or explaining that an educator may know how to address that, or being able to talk to them. Typically, any type of these emotions, whether they come out or not, they can be seen as problematic. And that's something that we have to come to realize, that a lot of these traumatic symptoms can often be seen more quote unquote challenging. And so it's really important to be able to see what's realistic and what can be put in place, especially when something does happen, whether it's like outbursts of like crying or feeling triggered on campus or not feeling safe. And secondly, we also feel it's really important to have supportive services for educators where vicarious trauma or secondary trauma can happen to an educator as well. And so we have here a graph, and I can barely see it, but we have the different wellness of 8 dimensions of wellness, where we have emotional, environmental, physical, spiritual, and societal. And these different areas can really help to develop ways and that are interconnected that can really support students, whether it's through empowerment, through feeling heard, and also feeling supported to either connect with resources in the community or out with other types of services. And that's really our last slide. Yeah, we're sorry we're not able to connect the PowerPoint back up, but we're open to any questions or discussion.
Thank you for that, Anna and Katina. Hector, do you have anything on your agenda, on your questions?
So far, I don't see anything in the chat box. So the chat box is open for questions. If not, you can use the raise your hand function and I'll call on you accordingly.
I do have a question. So I think that you ladies bring up a very good point as far as trauma. And it allowed me to kind of reflect as far as being in education and advising students, and just kind of how we self-disclose to students and how we model as educators, and just sharing a little bit about myself as far as, you know, being impacted in that sense. I can see where the machismo, the whole, you know, we have people that have been in prison, and where the lack of communication, or it's not really even the lack, it's just the uncomfortable feeling of saying, you know what, I've been through some trauma, or, you know, it's very unlikely that especially, I don't want to say that just all males, but it's going to be more difficult for a male to disclose some of that trauma. And so when you mention that, it gives me hope for students, because it allows me to be able to be more transparent with our students. And I've always told our mentors about being role models and modeling the professionalism and behaviors, and providing resources out to our students. But most importantly, what really caught my eye on this was that we really have a broken system. Okay, I mean, everybody knows we have a broken system, and it truly is a revolving door. I mean, the system is created that way some beg to differ, but I believe that our system is created that way, and it has to do to funding, you know. Anyways, I was just thinking about this, and I know this is thinking out loud, but I was thinking, why are we, and I know this is probably way up there, you know, with politics, but why aren't we providing people that are incarcerated with therapy, mandatory, whether once they get out on parole or probation? We're doing a disservice to our community, to everybody out in society, pretty much, if we're just releasing them after being punished, per se, and we're just kind of creating back a reoffending cycle for them. And so it just gives me a lot of information as far as how I'm going to be communicating more with our students, and not just, you know, advising, oh, well, we have, you know, psych services or things like that. I think it's very important as males, as male role models, to be able to I mean, to a certain extent, you know, to say, hey, you know, it's okay to have these feelings. It's okay to go through this stuff. You know, we don't necessarily have to be, you know, macho about everything. There has to come a time when you know, you have to be able to share and disclose that. And so modeling that behavior is super important as educators, whether it's male or female. So, but thank you so much. That really opened up my eyes on that.
Mhm.
Appreciate that.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I don't know, Katina, were you gonna mention anything or say anything?
As you were talking, it did make me think of going through, like navigating through this graduate program, and just how I was unaware of like so many people who were system impacted. And I think what really so where I really started learning that others has similar situations related to me, it was because in undergrad, someone just opened up and we related, and she basically shared her story with me, and it made me think like, dang, if she would never shared, I would never opened up, I would never learned like about these services, I wouldn't have known anything. So I just I was able to like kind of share my story, and that opened other students up. But there is a gap in services of, we're doing a lot of word of mouth, but where's like the actual services that can be offered to us. I feel like that's part of the reason I did want to assist in presenting today, to talk about those barriers and those gaps of services that are essential and needed.
Yeah. I also wanted to add that Ugo, you bring up a really good point, because in terms of like how are therapy services being offered, and especially for people that do disclose that they have gone through any type of trauma, or whether childhood or adulthood. And I think it goes into like a lot of different areas, but some of the main parts that I think of is just going back to like almost how you said the system is broken. So it's like a capitalist system and survival comes first. So it's like if you need your housing needs, your immediate needs first, and then on top of that, like if you are checking in with parole, like what are their exact like requirements that they want? And it's usually not related to trauma, and it's not asking about how has trauma impacted you, or how can we get you connected to services that are healing. And also just going back to also, what are ways that we can also engage, whether it's through our own family's ways of healing, but also that are not typically considered, I guess you can say like quote unquote, like the traditional mainstream services. And so I think of a lot of like how music, dance, different forms of spiritualities that can really help in terms of healing. And so, yeah, I think that there's so much room for how we can begin to explore how healing can take place, especially for people that have gone through any type of incarceration.
Thank you. So we have two questions in the chat box. One from Jennifer Casey. She asked, can either of you share with us some of your best experiences or experiences you've heard from students in a classroom that have helped the student and why? What did instructors do to make it a better experience for these type of students?
Oh, experience regarding helping someone who was system impacted. Is that what the question is referring to?
Experience in regards to students who could be previously incarcerated or at risk, the intersectionality between incarceration, at risk, women, people of color, things like that. You know, what are some of the best ways for me as an instructor to make connections, you know, to help or work with these students? What do I look for? You know, I mean, it's like really hands-on. What is hands-on, the best practices? You know, how can I be a better instructor for them?
So I can speak from my personal appearance experience, basically going back to how I said a stigma. Oftentimes I feel like people do have stigmas regarding people who are system impacted, and you may not want to disclose exactly what has happened to you. But I had a wonderful instructor who was open, and throughout the social work program was teaching us about empathy. And I just felt that when I disclosed to her that she was coming from a place of love, and just like practicing empathy and really being concerned. So that was ideal for me. And she kind of took me under her wing and was a role model to me. So I will honestly say it was is based off the connection. Like I said, from my experience, I feel like it's based off the connection, because I wouldn't disclose to anybody if I feel like I was going to be stigmatized, especially if I attended a class or a meeting and the terminology that the person used did not make me feel comfortable. But if I did hear somebody that appeared to be an advocate, that truly was concerned about trauma, truly was concerned about people who are system impacted, I will feel more inclined to speak to that person and see if they can offer me some additional services and allow my experience through the higher education to be a better one.
I also wanted to add that I think it's really critical to have some context on cultural responsive and gender responsive approaches, especially when working already with students that have been impacted. So for example, clearly not overgeneralizing or seeing incarcerated people as monolithic so that all their experiences are the same. And so for example, for I think of like people who have had experiences through like jail or prison or detention jails. These experiences could have similarities, but they can have their own unique experiences to that. And so just being able to have relationships in the community already with programs that exist, such as Katina mentioned, Root and Rebound, Project Rebound, the Holistic Center. There's a different areas that it's good to have relationships with to also understand the unique needs that students may have, just because some students may not be so inclined to maybe go to just going back to like mainstream therapy services. So I think it's just being very well aware and culturally responsive and gender responsive. Yeah, different types of approaches in that.
I did want to add really quickly, just how Anna said, being aware. I have no problem talking about like my ACEs score. I have no problem telling like people that I was a former foster youth. So just also hearing like if I disclose that, maybe if you wanted to follow up, not you, but like a staff, like I'm letting you know how I experienced a lot of trauma. So if you did want to disclose that, I mean, if you did want to offer assistance and being aware that I have gone through something, that'll be beneficial as well. Instead of me disclosing and then someone disregarding it, I wouldn't want to disclose it anymore.
Yeah. Sorry, one last point too that I wanted to add is a little bit of like the work that I'm doing right now. So I work with adults, young adults, youth that have been incarcerated in detention jails. And so that's one thing that has really even brought in my awareness is even with language. So for example, some of these youth have been at the border in detention jails, and now they're navigating or wanting to go to community college, and their first language is not Spanish, it's not language, but it's also indigenous languages. So I think it's going back to understanding like the unique needs and how incarceration looks very uniquely for different people.
Thank you. So we have a question from Anna Quinata. She says, is it true that therapy is an additional cost for some of those who are incarcerated? I know some people who are either are or have been in prison, and some said it was available and some said they didn't have access.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. Anna says, is it true that therapy is an additional cost for some of those people who are incarcerated? I know some people who either are or have been in prison, and some said it was available and some said they didn't have access.
Sorry, I don't know if I got the full question again, but what I did understand is, and what I've seen is that some facilities don't have the access to therapy. I don't know if that was the question.
Yes, that's the question.
Okay. Yeah. So for example, I can use here locally in Fresno. When I was working with women who were at the Fresno County Jail, one of the things that I did notice is that I think it's called the TIC program, or I can't remember the acronyms, but it's pretty much this program within the jail, and they serve very specifically, like it's male or female, but the males program only had this specific type of services, which provided, I think, very limited, like educational, I think like information about services in the community. It wasn't like anything related to counseling, but I bring it up because this was the only type of service that was available there. And for example, for the very specific like women's unit, this program didn't exist. And even though it was very limiting in exactly what they provide, they didn't have that. And so that's where I got to learn, at least in the jail facility, that no, like counseling is not available. I'm not familiar and I'm not too sure. Katina, if you know, like at the like prisons, if that's available everywhere.
No, I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't have the answer to that question.
So that seems to be all the questions in the chat box, unless anyone wants to enter some more. I don't see any hands raised at the moment.
In the chat, I put my information there. I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but I'm the Rising Scholars Program counselor. So we're fairly new, but just like Project Rebound at Fresno State, programs like this, events like this are going to be used to empower our students and advocate for them. So this way, they feel a lot more comfortable either sharing or being in a program where they can be with with other students that have similar backgrounds. Okay. If you guys want to use that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, ladies, for your guys' information. I think that your information is super valuable for everyone here. I'm not sure if anybody has any further questions. Please fill out the survey at the end of our session. Ladies, do you guys have anything else that you want to say to the group? Any further comments?
I think that's about it.
Okay.
Katina?
All right.
And the questions, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you everyone for showing up. We do have some breakout sessions at the end, some panels, and we'll provide that information inside the chat as well. Okay. You guys all have a good day.